biology first. I know it's better at the beginning.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is John Green-Otero. I'm here with my esteemed co-host, Sarah Heinrich. Pull up a chair and join us today at La Mesa, where educators gather to discuss topics around STEM education and early childhood setting. Today, we are so excited to have Dr. Jose Martinez Hinestroza. He is a researcher professor at UTSA, and he focuses on mathematics, content, and teaching methods for elementary school teachers from the unique perspective of having a kindergarten elementary school. From the perspective of having been a kindergarten elementary school teacher. He also leads kindergarten mathematics component of the Great First Eight, a full-day project-based curriculum. Thank you so much for being with here today.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
We're so thrilled. I mean, your range of expertise is tremendous. I'd love, if you wouldn't mind, just sharing with our audience a little bit about your background, and sort of what brings you, what made you fall in love with this particular area?
Yeah, so I am from Colombia, originally born and raised, and then I came here to US for grad school years ago. So what happened in between that brought me to the world of math education was kind of like serendipitous in a way, because my initial undergrad work was as an industrial engineer, and I worked in the corporate world for 3 years. And after that, decided or knew from the beginning that that was not my calling and that my passion was elsewhere. And I was lucky enough to have an opportunity to teach. Initially, it was supposed to be a short thing that ended up being the rest of my career when they pushed me into a kindergarten classroom because they needed kind of like a substitute quickly. And I absolutely loved that from the moment I set foot on that teacher's lounge and got the conversations that were going on and got to see the resources. So I think that background in the engineering world and my work in the corporate world that was specifically focusing on statistics and data analysis for decision making connected then to this passion for teaching and for being in the classroom.
I love it.
That's a very short summary of
I love it.
how life took me here.
I have a lot of personal synergy with that, where I remember going to first, I substituted a bunch of different age ranges, but going to elementary school the first time and being told by my principal, who had much more wisdom than me at the time, she said, "Oh no, you need to be in an early childhood classroom." And I was terrified, but like you, absolutely fell in love. And so there's a lot of resonance there for me personally. So part of the reason why we're here today is to talk a little bit about math within the context of early childhood. And you not only had that personal experience, right, but coming from a math-focused career and then moving into the early childhood space, but also you now teach early childhood educators,
right,
math concepts here. So just to kick us off, math is often referred to as a universal language, and it serves as the foundation piece of science, technology, math, and engineering. How is that reflected in your experience in early childhood? Like, how does that show up?
So the idea of mathematics as a universal language in my work, more often than not, and this surprises people sometimes, comes as a critique about the idea of math as a universal language.
Oh, yeah.
Why I mean like that.
A little research on it. No, I wanted, not every day.
Yeah. So I understand the idea and the comfort, because for some people it's very personal. The fact that mathematics can be thought of something universal and something that everybody can understand. If you're looking at the symbols, looking at the numbers, that gives people a comfort. And I do believe there is, to a certain extent, a certain convention that has reached many parts of the world, and you can actually at least get an idea of what another person is doing or thinking just by looking at the symbols or whatever other form of mathematical representation they are showing to you. At the same time, the critique part of it that comes from my work comes more from ethnographic work and critical studies, in which then the challenging part of positioning mathematics as a universal language is to which extent math can be thought of as a language.
Yeah.
So then the whole idea of how we define language comes in place. But then the other part that to me is a little bit more persuasive is that when some communities argue that mathematics is a universal language, that universality part of it means there was an imposition of this mathematics, and other ways and forms of doing mathematics then get negated. So indigenous ways of doing mathematics, or ways of doing mathematics that perhaps have been taking place for centuries and millennia in Africa, and the mathematics that maybe mathematicians from Asia developed, sometimes traveled to other places like Europe, and then got labeled and communicated to the rest of the world. And it is that version that gets labeled as universal. So when we think about these other ways of doing and being mathematical, then we could perhaps see things that are not what we are accustomed to or what we're used to seeing, that then could challenge that idea of universality. Then to translate that idea into something that perhaps it's closer to teachers and people who are working with kids more closely, the example that I gave, or I typically give my students at the university, is the ways people do, for example, long division, and just how people organize where the numbers are and where the division box is. It is done a certain way here in the US. In Colombia, it's kind of like the other way around. So I always show them how just the numbers are reorganized, and the box is not facing up in Colombia, but it's facing down. So whenever, to this day, and after having been in classrooms for years here in the US, to this day, I see that long division and my head has to turn. Try to do it my way or see it my way. So that's just one silly small example of how that can be a challenge to the idea of universality. The reason why that matters is because if a teacher thinks that mathematics is universal, period, with no other consideration, anything that doesn't look the way that the teacher thinks that is universal, then it's deemed to be incorrect. And therefore, the kid is asked to replace or erase whatever they had, whatever they brought to the classroom, and replace it with that image that the teacher has of what is universal. So if a recent immigrant kid comes from a country like Colombia and many other countries in the world, and they do long division the way that I do it, or other ways that are out there, then chances are that a teacher that just ascribes to the idea of mathematics as universal would not even try to understand that, would just label that as incorrect, and then direct the kid to just one single way. Yeah.
And so while the concepts that most cultures experience in their mathematical journey, so we think about early childhood concepts of more and less, concepts of addition and subtraction. For older children, those concepts of multiplication and dividing into groups may be a concept that exists universally among the human race, that the process and methods by which we represent it and go about teaching and tackling it may be vastly different based on cultural context.
Right. And then there's also the idea of what would the mathematics that we do in schools look like if we were curious or had access to others' mathematics. So the idea in some indigenous community, I was at a conference in Australia a couple of years ago, the ICME conference, and there were mathematics educators from Chile, and what she was describing in, I think it was the Mapuche's counting system, is that the idea of having a number, if I remember correctly, beyond 1,000 didn't really make sense. Why would you need that? So why would you need a place value system beyond these 4 or these 3 digits? That was the example this colleague was giving, are only going to count up to maybe this many animals, or up to maybe this many produce that we are going to exchange, or these items that we need to make sure that we have an inventory of. So why do we need a value system that allows us to represent something beyond that? So then the idea is that exploring that kind of other way of thinking about mathematics and doing things like counting is yes, many civilizations across the world have had the need to count and to keep track of how we count. That's the universal part that you were referring to. But at the same time, how we have devised systems to be able to count and to keep track of where we're counting can be vastly different and depend on where we are and our context and the needs of our context. And I think that if we get to teach that to kids, to be sensitive to their context and to their mathematical needs in what they're doing, their communities, then chances are that we're going to have people solving problems that really matter to where they are.
I mean, I'm so glad we recorded that. There was a part of me that was like, I wish we recorded that, but we did. That is so beautifully said. Sincerely. What I love about everything you just said, which touches on some things, so I might jump around our guiding questions a little bit because I like it to be a little more natural. We think about early childhood, this space where you want to create as much curiosity, as much authenticity, and that the children are driving that, right? Yeah. And so one of the challenges that always come when we're educating educators, when we're trying to build systems, is that human beings come with a bias towards their own lived experience, a bias towards their own perspective. And I love the way you're articulating and reframing for us that the challenge, because I really got lost in that space that you first touched on, of what makes a language and how do you dissect. Sarah Heinrich and I were talking about this earlier in the hallway, but your reframing resonates with me so deeply. This idea that, well, there are so many different ways, and the way a culture might utilize that system indicates its representation, how it shows up, because it's symbols, right? All of this is a symbol system.
Yeah.
And so even the notion you were talking about where you change the way your division symbol system represents something profound. And our job as educators to lean into that curiosity as well, to center a more holistic experience of all of our children's. We call it funds of knowledge, right? Whatever we want to say. So I love that. That's a powerful way to begin conversation.
I appreciate it. And then part of it too is what happens or what opportunities are there for that kind of like cultural exchange if we were to, as you were saying, activate that children curiosity, both in the kids, in the literally in the children, but also in the teachers and ourselves as educators, and then try to learn another community's number system. And then the symbols are going to look different. Yeah. So the idea of, well, mathematics is universal because it's the same symbol no longer holds true there. But maybe there are concepts that those symbols are represented that are the universal part. So what if we try to understand this other numeric system? And what if we try to then see how it connects to ours, and where we would use one or another, and what opportunities are there to then learn about that culture, that civilization that developed, that number system that we could study. So it's kind of like embracing the idea that we are doing mathematics as a human endeavor, as a sociocultural activity, and therefore we address the symbols. And if we address the content, we should or could also benefit from addressing the context where those symbols and the histories where those symbols were developed.
I love that as the vehicle. So let me push and ask this authentically of you. So because you're framing, so assuming yes, all the things you said, we're going to have different ways to represent our systems because our language has different ways of representing numbers, concepts, and all those things. Is there a starting place? Is there a natural starting place in your experience where if you had two distinct cultures in a space or languages in the space that you might introduce, take what Sarah was talking about, the concept of more, right? The concept distinct of a symbol, distinct of the way it manifests itself in a math system. How do you encourage educators to approach math concepts in the classroom? Is there something broad that everyone should be doing distinct of that, and then use that as a vehicle to get to that culture space, to get to that curiosity space? Or do you start in the culture curiosity space?
My suggestion tends to be the latter. Let's start with the curiosity. And the reason for that is not necessarily because that's one of the only ways, or the way that works the better, which is another whole discussion in terms of how we measure math and math performance and all of that.
Right.
But it's my suggestion comes from the place of, as teachers and as teacher educators, many times as researchers, sometimes there is that tendency to think that children came from a void, like they were in an absolute void and they left that void to land in the classroom, which we know that it's not true. And that from a very, very early age, kids already are doing things that are mathematical in nature, even if they are not aware of it, or even if they are not intentionally or purposefully using those tools or those ways of being to solve mathematical problems. Therefore, if we, no matter how young the kid is, go in the direction the kid is pushing us and try to notice the mathematics that the kid is noticing and try to follow the curiosities that the kid is bringing in, then chances are that we're going to be able to then eventually bring into dialogue the kid's ways of doing mathematics that the kid is already passionate about, traditional or normative protocols to represent that mathematics in our society or in our culture, and then potentially other ways of doing the same or similar or alternative mathematics. So I think that if we start with the kid and with the kids community, and as you were saying, funds of knowledge and needs and resources and curiosities, then we increase the likelihood of actually bringing in things into dialogue.
I love it. I mean, very high scope.
I think about what you just said, and we come from a space where in the early childhood educator classroom, in the early childhood educator space, we apply a lot of that approach with curiosity and co-constructing with children when it comes to literacy. You think about literacy education, which is its own symbolic language. You're still using representation. These symbols mean this thing, where we approach children almost naturally at their description and mark making and drawing as they attempt to express the world around them, and then also provide them the cultural context clues to do a formalized system that fits within their context. And we don't necessarily always apply that in math and our approaches to how children think about because that's what they're doing, whether it is literacy or mathematics, is constructing their understanding of their world and finding ways to express and represent that with their peers and the adults around them.
Exactly. And if people sometimes define mathematics as a field or as a tool and activity that it's allowing us to understand patterns and maybe to predict patterns. So even thinking about math from that perspective, which is not, again, a universal one, but it's one possible perspective that connects to me to what you just said. Because if we think about math that way, then it means that as kids are going through the world, they are beginning to deal with patterns. And if we accept that they are beginning to deal with patterns, then they are doing mathematics in some way. And they might be curious about how to refine those ways of doing mathematics. For example, when kids are in researchers who have talked about those mathematical learning trajectories and they think specifically about patterns, then one of those steps in that trajectory is intuitive patterns, which is the kid doesn't know that they're repeating a pattern or creating a pattern, but they kind of are integrating into a pattern. And that just happens, for example, when a toddler who's learning to speak is already having a conversation and understood there is a pattern. Somebody makes these noises and the other one does something that seems to be listening. This person stops and then now it's your turn to make those noises.
Call and response,
So there is a pattern there. And their body's already engaging in patterns. They're blinking.
That's right.
Their hearts are beating. They're beginning to take steps, which are patterns. So what would it look like for us in early childhood math education to then extend that, mathematize that, and bring it into dialogue again with other forms of representing mathematics?
I love it. And what's, I don't consider myself deeply, clearly nowhere in the realm of deep knowledge you have around math. Where I sort of entered into my passion around early childhood was really around the neuroscience of, around Bruce Perry's work, Neurospatial for Education. Dr. Bruce Perry, are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
And what's interesting, really, he doesn't speak about it in terms of math, but I think you two would get along beautifully because he talks about that exact thing, the way in which, even from a biological perspective, as we develop in the womb, we're developing a pattern, right? We hear the rhythmic beat of our parent's heart, right, inside the womb, and our cells grow to that beat. And there's something powerful in the way that our immune systems regulate to percussion, to pattern.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot about creating neurologically safe spaces for children. I think a lot about how we can create routines and rituals that create patterns that create safety.
Yeah.
And so I'm really appreciating how you've now tied that directly to, in that same patterning space, you're developing the foundational understanding of math. Like, that gives me chills. Like, that is such a cool notion, right? Because we externalize it too much, right? I think in education, we like to put it in buckets. We like to say, well, this is our literacy time, this is our math time, and this is our STEM time, or whatever else. But even now, just in this little brief conversation, we see this space where you're creating a powerful, safe space for children to explore, driven by their curiosity, and you're doing everything you need to do to get them ready for their math life, their literacy, everything.
That's right. And what would a world look like in which we don't have these buckets, this compartmentalization, that we can maybe integrate things as we need and maybe de-integrate them and have our math time now when we need them, like in a more responsive way. So, and teachers do that. And there are some great examples out there. And some of the teachers that I am so lucky to research with are good examples of bringing children's books into math time, but also bringing math questions into their reading and writing time. And then things like for those doing socio-emotional learning or doing morning meetings, what does it look like to bring, again, the mathematical aspects to those discussions, and how can mathematics contribute to those? But at the same time, what are the limits? Where is the point where we, the teachers, the researchers, the kids, can acknowledge that's not a question that math can contribute a lot to? We better use these other ways of knowing that we have. So those, I think, that are also important in terms of developing these ethics of when and how and for which purposes to use mathematics.
Yeah, I think it's wise. That's clearly wise. So do you have, we'll stay on our children for a second, then I'd love to lean into your expertise. And I apologize if I've done that.
No, it's
we'll say.
We're really excited having your brain in the space.
That's doing here.
Really great. So I want to sit for a second real quick to see if you have any tips and tricks for our educators who are listening around, ways in which to naturally reinforce children's curiosity. You already established that for us. Children are the driver of their own curiosity. Just reinforce and introduce. I like how even in the way you articulated, I could see this representation of this puzzle pieces you were putting together. You're like, okay, we're going to use your curiosity. We're going to use some of the natural things that you're going to do. We're going to embed some of our own, whether you're in a system that has natural math-related symbology in it, and then maybe other cultures. So what other advice would you give as someone's seeking to do that exact thing? Increases children's understanding of math naturally in the, let's say, 0 to 5 space.
Yeah, so as the kids, sometimes I think that we have the fear of, for the kids who can, of asking them questions, either because we don't think anything is going to come out of those conversations, or because we might be afraid of how to take in those responses and align them with everything that I know that the teachers need to do, with a structured curriculum, with pacing guides, with assessment points and all of that. But if we ask the kids, and if we treat whatever they bring respectfully and with authentic curiosity, they will tell us so much. So in my experience, both as a teacher, now as a researcher, as a teacher educator, actually directly, explicitly asking the kids has brought some of the most brilliant and more complex ideas. Complex from the point of view of what is the problem here, and complex from the point of view of the mathematics that are involved. To give you just one tiny example.
I love examples.
Thinking about what is a circle. Is a circle a shape or is it not? If we said, because the textbook had told us or the teacher has said that a shape has straight lines, and therefore you can measure area and perimeter, then the circle is not a shape. But that point is already too late to be like, no, what I meant is a polygon has straight lines. But then circles kind of have straight lines, and teachers and I have used popsicle sticks to create a quadrilateral, and then we've been able, a whole bunch of popsicle sticks, we've been able to turn those into something that looks like a circle. And those ideas were following the kids' curiosities and the kids' comments. So the mathematics they can bring in and the questions they can ask sometimes are some of the most complex questions that mathematicians grapple with when they are trying to come up with definitions or state their assumptions in ways that are going to allow others to read their work. So yeah, ask the kids, observe the kids in contexts that are not only the classroom or the school. And that we can use, I think that could be a good use of technology nowadays, instead of just thinking of technology as screen time, thinking of technology as what if the parents or the caregivers send the teacher these images of kids doing something. And what if we try to find the math in there, or try to invite the kids into finding the mathematics in whatever is going on. So yeah, I would advocate for the teachers to ask the kids.
With some of my older children, I used to do an activity with our technology where you would take an iPad and your job was just with the camera. Your job was to go around the classroom and find examples of. So in this instance, go find an example of math in that space. And so I could see educators, older educators particularly, it's just a little trickier in the early childhood space. Well, the lower else. But I love the way you're sort of holding space. This is just John privileging my love of philosophy between sort of this open-ended philosophical perspective and what I think a lot of people either are gravitated to math because it's concreteness, right? And the definitiveness of an answer, right?
That's right.
I hear that all the time, especially growing up. Our childhoods, I imagine all of us shared some version of there's a right, wrong answer in math, whereas you're really approaching it with a much more holistic, flexible perspective of math. And I love your example of the circle being such a great example of asking, well, is this a shape?
Yeah.
In a powerful way.
Yeah. And that is something that, again, it's really deeply rooted.
Yes.
The idea of if you're doing math, is because you're going to find a right answer, which is already, you have to find an answer. So it cannot necessarily be something you
ambiguity is wrong. That's right.
And ambiguity is wrong. So even recently, from some of the student teachers that I work with, has been this idea of why are we getting answers? Well, because we're studying geometry, the geometry that the kid will study eventually. So we are describing these shapes, and there's a lot of mathematics going on in describing these shapes. But yeah, we're not getting to a number, and that's uncomfortable for some of the students. Just even that, when the eventual description, you could say there is going to be a right and a wrong description. Right. Even that feels uncomfortable for some. And yeah, the idea of mathematics as just getting to the answer, and that I agree with some people that refer to that as school mathematics. And I do think that it serves its purpose.
Oh, of course.
And it's needed, right? But at the same time, it's a narrow view of what mathematics is and the process of doing mathematics.
That's right.
And a counter argument that I think can be powerful for a teacher or anybody in general who is worried about not representing or doing mathematics with the kids in ways that get to a right answer is it's going to be so frustrating for that child once they get to a point where they're doing mathematics and they're the ones who have to define the problem, state their assumptions, and live with the fact that there might be more than one correct answer for whatever they're doing. And that's more authentic, real mathematics that mathematicians do and that people in STEM fields or math intensive fields deal with. So I try to be careful when I say this because I don't want teachers and others to misinterpret what I'm saying as if I'm saying all of mathematics should be about things that don't have one definitive, unique, correct answer. Because what I'm saying is that is one part of mathematics, and it would be a disservice to the kids not to expose them to that kind of mathematics, but also to the other part in which they need to live with ambiguity. And as you were saying, kind of like sit with the discomfort of just thinking about something for a very long time. And in the end, having kind of like a rough idea of what could or could not be. And that's it.
I personally love the way, I would probably be I had a period in my childhood where I was considered gifted in math. And then you hit this place where you have a math teacher that didn't quite carry you to that next logical space. And I can remember the last grade math teacher I had was 8th grade. And then I transferred into like an advanced math course. And that math teacher was very prescriptive, sort of like you're talking about this sort of, it was one piece of the puzzle, but it wasn't holistic. And I fell in love in that same year with philosophy because my personal view of the world was much more in the gray. It was much more this open, like asking those questions. And if I had a teacher like you that would have said, "Oh, that's part of this conversation," I would have likely followed that path even further. So I really appreciate both selfishly for our early childhood educators that you're really giving us this gift of saying, no, a big piece of this conversation where you're not violating the integrity of math by doing this. Center the curiosity, center the questions, center the space where children are still exploring what is bendable, right? What is malleable. And there will always be time, because from a sort of philosophical place, I think about as systems get more complex, they often get more rigid, right? And that's kind of sounds like what you're talking about. You're talking about in this building place, there's a lot of flexibility as defines the concepts and the terms and understand so that we can then build upon them.
Yeah. And you make me think of two things. So the first one, it's the more pragmatic one for the teachers listening, which is an entry point for teachers, student teachers that maybe still feel uncomfortable with the idea of mathematics not just being about right or wrong answers is, I think, something that teachers tend to be more willing to try, which is at least there's several ways to get into that right or wrong answer. And that's already a huge change in mindset from the way that I learn math and many other people learn math, which is here are the steps to solve this particular problem. The textbook laid them out for you, or the teacher explained them to you. Now you go and repeat them with 20 problems that are pretty much the same. To now think about, well, there's different ways of getting to that, and different people are going to have an easier time using different ways to solving that problem. It doesn't mean that one way is better than the other. At the same time, there's room for debate and dialogue, and maybe we can think about in which cases my way of solving this problem is more efficient, and in which ways yours is more elegant, and in which ways yours is clear for somebody else to read or understand what you were doing. So there is that debate, there is that opportunity, but there's different ways. And I think that teachers tend to find that entry point easier to grapple with compared to problems, high-level tasks, as some call them, in which the final answer, there might be multiple final answers. So there's one thing that you made me think about. And the second thing that you made me think about is the idea of the ethics of doing mathematics in those ways and bringing the kids into those conversations. Because if we think of mathematics only or primarily as this tool that is going to allow us to give right or wrong answers, then we end up with scenarios when we're trying to do mathematics or consume mathematics, expecting it to give us that right or wrong answer. And if the problem is what some call a wicked problem, in which all of the conditions are not clear and not all of the information is available, then chances are that we're going to have a certain possibility of coming up with maybe a probable answer, but that's it. Or we are going to be able to come up with certain systems or scenarios, but that's it. We're not really going to be able to actually, going back to the idea of patterns, predict what's going to happen next, what's the next step in that pattern. But just give these kind of like fuzzy ideas. If we only give kids and only talk to kids about this one right, correct answer and everything else is wrong, then that faith in mathematics as the ultimate truth teller, I believe, can be harmful in the long term.
I mean, I think about long-term application.
Right.
And I think what you just said is such a great example. We have extrapolated the ethics of math. And then we expect math to be applied in situations that require perspective and ethics, considerations of the larger, I have these conversations all the time, not in big, grandiose, scary ways, but in ways in which you're looking at spreadsheets as an administrator or a system-wide leader, and you're making calculated decisions based on math.
Yeah.
But those numbers translate to people.
Yeah.
Those numbers translate to systems and support structures and all these things. And so I think there's something really beautiful about the way you think about this work.
And if I may interject there, just again, because I appreciate you saying like, it doesn't have to be like this big, scary philosophical conversation. It can be very concrete in the classroom.
Yes, of course.
And the classical example to me is when there is a math problem in which the kids are studying fractions and the teacher brings in brownies or something for the kids to share, with the expectation that if we're going to share this in our pairs, then the kids will arrive to the idea of halves. And if we then bring two pairs together, then the kids will arrive to the idea of quarters. But then what happens if I don't like brownies? So if we split them between those who want, that's a correct answer for our situation. So that flexibility, I think, is more easily to see in the classroom. And it's one of the examples in which we're thinking where we're saying you don't necessarily have to hold on to that one correct answer that you had in mind when you designed the problem.
This is a perfect transition to a space where I'd love to get your insight into how you train educators and support educators in their own ability. But I just want to call out to the group. He just gave you a brilliant idea on how to, because we, maybe not brownies specifically, depending on your program, but what a cool idea. I was in the classroom right now, bring in something, talk about the concept of sharing, and then don't prescribe this notion that it has to be equal. Don't prescribe it and then have the discussion around, well, because I came to Barry, for example, John would participate in it, and that would be okay. We'd still be successful. I think that is such a cool way to introduce math concepts in a more holistic way.
That respects the kids and gives, I think, a richer perspective of what math can be.
Love it.
Yeah.
What a cool hot tip. So tell us a little bit about how you approach, because part of your job right now, right, is supporting educators in doing this. You work with elementary school teachers. Tell us a little about that. What do you focus on? What challenges are you facing in that space?
Yeah, so my research is at the intersection between bilingual education and mathematics education, broadly speaking. And to be more specific, there's three threads that are interconnected in my research. One is that my research is participatory. What that means is that I don't follow another kind of doing research in which maybe you as a researcher and your colleagues come in as experts and maybe design a curriculum or an intervention. You give it to the teacher, train the teacher to be able to apply your intervention with fidelity and then measure things or observe things. There is one way of doing research. The way that I do it, because it's participatory, is that the teachers and the researchers, we come together, we kind of like continue finalizing or specifying what the research problem actually is in the research context, how we're going to address it, and then we go develop whatever transformations of the classrooms we perceive that we need to pursue together. So the participatory aspect is very important for me. Then the second thread that it's connected to that is the idea of affirming children's ways or resources to do mathematics and ways of making sense of mathematical ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier said than done, partly because as adults we already have the ways in which we do math, the ways in which we traditionally know that kids are going to be assessed. So being able to notice the resources that kids are actually using and how the kids are using them can be tricky. So I've been working with these teachers, trying to find those resources and specifying the ways the kids are using them. To give an example, teachers and adults, I myself, then tend to think about participation as talk, and specifically as formal mathematical talk. So not just talking about your math ideas, but talking in a way that it's supposed to be understood as mathematically, not informal, not slang, not bilingual. Mm-hmm. So then what happens when the kids are showing us and telling us that they do participate in ways that maybe are not what's considered formal mathematical talk, or maybe they're participating in ways that are not talk at all, that are intent observation, or that are listening in, and that's a good, or ways that are embodied, and that's an important, authentic way of doing mathematics, kind of like looking into those resources. And then the third thread is, because I work with the teachers and I spend so much time hanging out in classrooms, then being able to use that opportunity to bring theory and practice into dialogue. So what are some theories? What are some constructs or concepts from research in education and in math education, in early childhood education, in bilingual education, that when we try to bring those, see them, or explain things that we see in the classrooms, something happens. The construct, the concept is not necessarily helping us explain the richness and the complexity of what we're seeing, or vice versa. To give an example, teachers and I have been thinking about the idea of silence and how can we as teachers use silence as a pedagogical resource, and when do kids use silence in math as a way of preserving the mathematical activity they're doing, or thinking about alternative math manipulatives, things that are actually not math manipulatives if you think about what the schools typically buy, which is useful and has a rich history of research behind it. But what if we bring some other stuff? What if we vary the size of that stuff that we're bringing into a classroom? And then other concepts like the idea of translanguaging, and how can we see or explain that, and how can what we're seeing in the classrooms talk back to the research on translanguaging, or things like even agency and children's agency. What does that mean? And there's a paradox in there if you think that you're giving kids the agency, which is already something. If you're giving it to the kids, it's really agency. But sometimes it feels like you're giving agency for the kids to play the game you want them to play. Right. So that kind of thing is
tremendous.
So all of the language stuff and the bilingualism and
so much. How? To quick time trade. How we go?
We have about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
Oh no, I think
no. We've been loving this.
I'll be short.
Please don't be short. I selfishly, if we need to, we can always have you come back. If you're so gracious to come back, talk to us more about this. But I think one of the things that, I guess, let me check in. Is there any questions online before I ask my own personal curiosities to the end of the earth and bother Dr. Martinez?
And we also have a question from Wayne.
Oh, yes, Wayne, please.
Thank you. Fascinating conversation. Professor, in another life, I did a lot of international negotiations and an international dispute resolution. And I was dealing with cultures from all over the world, from Asia, from Latin America, from Eastern Europe, from the Middle East. And so I have a sensitivity to the difference in as they say, my wife is British, and as we say that England and the U.S. are divided by a common language, and But I want to go back to your comment. I was not aware of this as far as that you were describing as to how you do math in Colombia, let's say, and go down instead of sideways. And so while I know that probably the majority of pupils in the U.S. in pre-K are from a common culture, there are a lot of students in the U.S. that are not from the same culture. And for example, Native American reservations, you may have mentioned that, or a lot of immigrants from Asia and et cetera. And yet I hear a lot about, from the teaching and education perspective, engaging the parents in the education of the children. So here is my question, which is not theoretical, but probably only affects a small percentage of our student population. So if you have an immigrant family whose parents were educated in a country where the math is taught differently than in the United States, and yet you're encouraging the family to, and so the kids go home with a math problem. And so the question is there, how does the teacher deal with that? How do the parents deal with that? Are they even aware of the difference when, the kids will think they'll understand it and then they'll go home and be totally confused? So can you just comment on all that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Everything about the question is very interesting because, and part of it too is the perception that there is like this unique culture in the classroom, as you were saying. Mm-hmm. It's not true, which is part of what you were saying, and it's changing and it keeps on changing. So I think that just being aware of that, it's already a first great step for everybody. Then it's interesting too, because believe it or not, many parents today, born and raised in the US, who went to the schooling system here and learned mathematics here, do not necessarily understand the homework the kindergarten teacher is sending home. So
even if they were raised in the dominant culture.
So it's not even a matter of, oh, this is pre-calc, or, oh, it's because I'm not from around here. But just because, as we were saying earlier, many curricula are getting into the movement of providing resources so that the kids get to solve problems in their own ways.
Yes.
Then that throws off some parents sometimes, and they're like, why are they doing this? Some people call it the new math. It's not the new math, it's just math. So anyways, all that to contextualize the idea and to say that I believe that what you're asking can be even more applicable than maybe some people would think. And then it's counterintuitive for some parents that are really eager to help, but sometimes not trying to impose their own ways of doing or solving the problem is the way to go. So do less, ask more questions, and try to understand how is it that the kid is solving the problem. Sometimes, again, try to give a very clear example. Parents have the tendency of doing the counting for the kids without realizing it. So yes, they give them a bunch of objects and let's count this together, and we're trying to figure out how many there are. But if the parent is the one who is moving, like, for example, sliding the objects that they're counting to the side, so we are only left with the ones that we have still to count, the parent is already doing a lot of the heavy lifting, as opposed to just giving the objects to the kid, asking how many there are, and then...
how can we tell?
Yeah. And sure, the kid will perhaps count something twice or skip one. So be ready to ask questions more than just saying that was wrong, or no, there's actually this many and I'm going to show you how. But for example, just let's count them again. Oh, we have a different number this time. How can we make sure? Because we said 8 last time, we're saying 10 this time. How can we make sure? Which again is an authentic mathematical practice. So yeah, I think that if parents and teachers approach the process with the same curiosity that we're trying to preserve in the kids, and if we are asking more than we're telling, that would be a good starting point specifically for these ages. Again, I'm not trying to say don't ever tell a child what the correct answer is, or don't ever show a child what to or how to solve a problem. There are going to be moments where the child gets frustrated, or where we actually unintentionally post a problem that perhaps was too complex for that particular day, for that particular child. So adjusting what we're doing, or showing a kid answering a question directly with, yeah, this is how I would do it. It has its place and it works for many situations. But what I would say is that in general terms, a good starting point could be just to ask the kids and follow whatever they are doing.
I love what you said about this is how I would do it, because it gives them a lot of space for that follow-up question of, so show me how you do it.
Right.
Yeah, I really think you have done such a great job of holding space for really centering authenticity in this space. I think it's hard for us sometimes as educators, as parents, as people in the community, when your desire to sort of rescue people, right?
Yes.
And it's so problematic, right? Because you're taking away, to the point you made earlier, you're taking away that productive struggle.
Yeah. And the issue of that rescuing, sometimes that comes from a place of a good intention,
Right.
but ends up limiting the kid.
Right.
Because again, I'm going to rescue you, but with my tools, and my tools are limited, and my tools are more rigid just because of the fact that I've lived more years doing the same thing.
Right.
But you with this fresh, malleable mind that is more creative than I am right now, probably can see things ways that I cannot even imagine or that I forgot. So maybe you can rescue me a little and then show me some of your creativity.
I completely agree. I think there's something there was something you said that really sort of hit me when you were talking about your answer. And it made me think about, well, what are you teaching in that moment instead of encouraging curiosity? It feels more like what you're teaching is a particular type of relationship that you're trying to force on a child to have with math.
Yeah.
So if I'm saying, okay, I'm going to hold all the blocks, or I'm going to hold the concept, or I'm going to hold the framework by which you engage with math, then it creates a kind of problematic way in which I approach it. And I might, if I want to have agency, if I want to feel free, if I want to retain some autonomy, I might then distance myself from math as a survival strategy, right? Because I don't want to participate in this strange codependent math problem you've given me, right? So I really like how you're illuminating what's happening in the space.
And I think that as teachers, we cannot complain about kids continuously asking us, is this correct? What do I do next?
If we're all the time
telling them what to do.
Snaps. Beautifully said.
Well, that takes us to time. I think that's an amazing place for us to end, despite the fact that I am bursting with more questions.
Same.
Perhaps we'll be lucky enough to have you back again.
I'd be happy to do that for sure.
Thank you so much. And just a quick call to action to everyone out there who wants to hear more, wants to talk more about math and early childhood. We want to hear from you. Please reach out, send in questions. We're always curious. Thank you so much for coming. It really, this hour flew by.
Oh my gosh,
I feel like it was a blink.
It really did.
Your students, this community is so lucky to have you.
I really appreciate it. The questions were very interesting, and I'm very happy to have these spaces and know that we're cultivating this space for the community to come together this way.
No, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to the D. Howard Foundation and Wayne for holding down the fort for us on that end. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you. Thank you, everyone. Tune in next time. Join us every third Tuesday. third Thursday of the month to be part of the conversation. Thank you all.